Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the What a Deck profile for the Metaphys Lucksack deck. I'm just going to go through everything in here, and then I'll explain how it works. So for monsters, we're playing 3 Metaphys Armed Dragon, 3 Metaphys Tyrant Dragon, 3 Metaphys Nephthys, 3 Metaphys Daedalus, 3 Metaphys Ragnarok, 2 Necroface, and 3 Eater of Millions. Our spells are 3 Pot of Desires, 3 Gold Sarcophagus, 3 Left Arm Offering, 3 Ace of Metaphys, 1 Dimensional Fissure, and 3 Metaphys Factor. Our traps, 1 Macrocosmos, 3 Metaphys Dimension. Our extra deck consists of 1 each of the Assault Blackwing, Onimaru, the Divine Thunder, Star Eater, Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend, Stardust Dragon, number 38, Red Eyes Flare Metal Dragon, Utopia Prime, Utopia Ragna Zero, Tornado Dragon, Baguska, Heartland Draco, Castell, Decode Talker, and Akashic Magician. The side deck I'll go over in a moment. So if you don't know, the word Lucksack is sort of a derogatory term used to describe a person who wins a game of skill through pure luck. And that's pretty much what this deck is. If you're unfamiliar with the Metaphys, most of them gain effects when they're banished, but there's not really a solid way to banish specific ones from your deck, so this deck relies a lot on random milling via Necroface. Necroface is when this card is banished, both players banish the top 5 cards from their deck. Most of the time we're going to be banishing this with Gold Sarcophagus. This is banish 1 card from your deck face up. During the second standby phase, after this card's activation, add that card to your hand. So if you get this, you can get your plays started. You banish a Necroface, banish 5 cards, and hopefully you get the things to get your plays started. Now if Necroface is already in your hand, you can get rid of it with Left Arm Offering. This is if you have 2 other cards in your hand. Banish your entire hand to add 1 Spell Trap from your deck to your hand. You cannot set spell trap cards the turn you activate this card. This is not only good for getting the Necroface out of your hand, but if you have Metaphys in your hands, you can then banish them to grab your Gold Sarcophagus and use it on Necroface. You can also use your Gold Sarc on any individual Metaphys if you want to, although usually just 1 by itself isn't what you need. Normally you're going to want to get a couple of them banished. We're also playing Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos, kind of cheesy one-ofs, but this is a cheesy deck already, and yet again, these are both cards where if you get Necroface in your hand and you happen to have these, then you can just set it or normal summon it. When your opponent destroys it, then it'll be banished and you'll get the effect. So what do these Metaphys monsters actually do when they're banished? There's 3 of them, Tyrant Dragon, Nephthys, and Daedalus, and they all have a similar effect that during the next standby phase after they were banished, you shuffle them back into the deck and then do something. Tyrant Dragon lets you special summon a Metaphys from your hand, Nephthys lets you add a Metaphys card from your deck to your hand, and Daedalus lets you banish another Metaphys card from your deck. So basically, Daedalus lets you set up for next turn, Nephthys lets you add cards to your hand. If you just want to add your spell traps, you can, or you can add a monster that you can then summon with Tyrant Dragon. In addition, all of 3 of these have effects when they're summoned by the effect of a Metaphys card. Tyrant Dragon is unaffected by trap cards, and if it attacks a monster, it can attack again in a row, which is pretty good with 2900 attack. Nephthys, when it's special summoned by a Metaphys, banish all set spell traps on the field, which can be good for clearing things if you're worried about spell traps, although that's very rare in the modern game. And Daedalus, probably the best monster in this deck. When it's special summoned by a Metaphys, you can banish all special summoned monsters on the field. So non-targeting board wipe just clears all the special summoned monsters except itself. Which, of course, if you have other Metaphys cards on the field, you're just going to activate their effects when you banish them, so it's really not much of a problem. There's 3 Metaphys spell traps. You've got this continuous Ace of Metaphys. Once per turn, you can banish a Metaphys from your hand, and if you do, draw a card. Good for unbricking these high-level monsters if you can't summon them for whatever reason, or just to activate their effects. Plus, it gets through your deck a little bit faster. It also has the effect, when a Metaphys card is banished, something happens depending on whose turn it is. Either all monsters except Metaphys lose 500 attack and defense, and that's a permanent decrease. Or if it's during your opponent's turn, you can change the battle positions of all monsters on the field except Metaphys monsters. That second effect is nearly useless because it's almost always going to happen during the standby phase, in which point they can just change their monster's battle position again. The first one can be pretty good, especially since we don't have anything to get over high attack. The highest we've got is 29. So this can lower things below that so that you can beat over them. Mostly, though, it's just good for draw power. And it is good to mention that you can banish any Metaphys card from your hand, so if you get multiple copies of this, you can always banish one copy to draw another card to try to get through your deck. Same thing if you have extra copies of your other spells. Speaking of which, Metaphys Factors, their field spell. Each turn, one level 5 or higher Metaphys monster you normal summon can be summoned without tributing, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. So basically, during your opponent's turn, you'll banish it. Which is a great way, again, to unbrick these hands. If you have these big monsters, you can just normal summon them. That's part of the reason why we play this normal monster that's a Metaphys. Not only is it a target for this, but if you get it in your hand, and you have the field spell, you can just normal summon a 2800 attack point beater. Perhaps just as importantly, though, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to Metaphys monster effect activations. This is actually really good, especially if you're playing against a deck that has a lot of traps, a lot of solemns and stuff like that, because then you can summon Nephthys, banish all their spell traps, and they can't activate anything to either negate this effect or to negate the summon. Finally, they have their trap, which is a pretty good stun. Again, it's continuous. It's if your opponent special summons a monster, except during the damage step, you can target one of your banished Metaphys monsters and special summon it, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. Again, pretty useful for Armed Dragon. You can banish it with Ace of Metaphys to draw a card, and then if you have this, when your opponent special summons a monster, you just get a 2800 attack point wall. Probably more importantly, though, if your other Metaphys cards in their owner's possession get banished while this card is face up in the spell trap zone, which is oddly specific, you can target one card your opponent controls and banish it, but you can only use each effect once per turn. Kind of a mouthful, but basically if you banish a Metaphys, you banish one of your opponent's cards. Which, if you have Ace of Metaphys, that just means during your turn you're banishing a card. If you happen to do Gold Sark and get a Metaphys off of it, you're banishing. And then, of course, Daedalus, during the standby phase, you're just banishing a Metaphys. So once you get this out, if you can keep it out, you're basically able to banish a card during your turn and during your opponent's turn, which can add up rather quickly. The only Metaphys card I didn't talk about then is Ragnarok. That's a level 4 tuner with 1500 attack. That's why we're playing some synchros. I rarely go into them, but it's never bad to have the option, just in case you get them. Most of these are really high-level monsters, but there's a chance, especially with something like Necroface. But anyway, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can banish the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you do, this card gains 300 attack for every Metaphys card banished by this effect. So it's kind of like a ride-in for the archetype. You normal summon it, you have a chance to get some of your plays started. Again, it's kind of random, especially since we don't have that many Metaphys cards, but it's the best you can do. Also, if this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can special summon a level 5 or higher Metaphys monster from your deck, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn, and you can only use each effect once per turn. And that's actually pretty good if your opponent happens to have something. Best case scenario, you banish 3 Metaphys when you summon this. It has 2400 attack. You beat over something, and then you can summon like a Daedalus, and it'll get its effect. It'll banish all the special summoned monsters, banish all their spell traps, or just get a Tyrant Dragon, which again can attack twice and is unaffected by traps. So you can actually put on quite a bit of damage in one turn with this deck, or stun them. There's a lot of things you can do. The only other 2 cards we have in here is Eater of Millions, just a good tech that works with banishing things in general. Must be special summoned from your hand by banishing 5 or more cards from your hand, field, or extra deck face down. Gains 100 attack and defense for each face down banished cards. This card cannot be tributed or used as material for anything but link material. And once per turn at the start of the damage step, if it battles an opponent's monsters, you can banish that monster face down. This is just a good bit of removal that you can special summon in addition to having some of your other monsters. You of course summon it by banishing the cards from your extra deck. Because they're face down, your Metaphys won't get their effects. Don't banish them from your hand. This basically just works out pretty well because of the Gold Sark Necroface combo. Oftentimes what will happen is if you get Gold Sark first turn, you banish your Necroface. Maybe you do like a Pot of Desires, maybe you do Eater of Millions. Either way, in 2 turns you can end up with like 30 or 40 cards banished, and then when you finally get that Necroface back to your hand, if you haven't won yet, you can normal summon it. I didn't mention this earlier, when it's normal summoned, shuffle all banished cards into the decks, and then this card gains 100 for each card shuffled into the main deck by this effect. So this thing will reset everything, your extra deck will be back, all your monsters and spell traps will be back in the deck, and this will have a ludicrous amount of attack, usually 4,000 or 5,000 attack. Likewise, that's just why we're playing Pot of Desires, banish 10, draw 2. Nearly everything in the deck is at 3, so you don't have to worry as much about banishing everything, except for banishing your 2 Necroface face down. You really don't want to do that. Normally try to Gold Sark or get one in your hand first. And then if the duel happens to go past a couple turns, you can always normal summon your Necroface and reset everything, so you don't have to worry about accidentally decking out with this. As for the extra deck, it's just a toolbox. It's whatever you could fit in here. I don't think I've ever summoned from it. I have a lot of rank 4s just because I have the Ragnarok and the Necroface, which are the 2 most likely things that I'll have out on the field. You've got 7s and 8s here, so I put a couple rank 7 and rank 8 Ixies. I've got a bunch of really high-level synchro monsters that you can make with Ragnarok. And of course, just a couple simple Link monsters. But really, you can fill this with whatever you feel like. Finally, there's just the side deck. The only thing I'd actually consider running in the side deck, Cosmic Cyclone, just because you want some spell trap removal. I think this works best because it goes with the banishing theme of the deck. But you could just as easily play Twin Twisters if you wanted to, especially if you were working with Metaphys Executor. This is the only Metaphys card we're not playing, and that's because it can't be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned from your hand by banishing 5 Metaphys cards with different names from your graveyard or face up from your field. While it's face up on the field, it can't be destroyed or banished by card effects, and once per turn, if your opponent has more cards than you do, you could target a banished Metaphys and special summon it, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. So it's pretty decent, and it has 3,000 attack, but it's really just that summoning condition. I found that most of the time, I couldn't get 5 Metaphys monsters in the graveyard. Oftentimes, especially if I started out with Macrocosmos, I wouldn't have anything in the graveyard. And while you can banish this with like Ace and Metaphys, you can't special summon it back, you can't normal summon it with Factor. I found that the normal monster was more useful than this thing was. You could maybe play it at 1 because it is searchable with Nephthys if you happen to get things in the graveyard. Or if you want to, you can play some things that help work around this. You could put Twin Twisters to discard stuff in the graveyard. You could make a 60-card Metaphys deck and play Lawn Mowing. And you can even play stuff like Trade-In since you got a couple level 8 monsters. Likewise, there's a couple cards in here. Cards of Sanctity. Banish all other cards you control and in your hand, and then draw until you have 2 cards. And Sacred Sword of 7 stars. Banish a level 7 monster from your hand or face up on the field and draw 2 cards. These are both decent cards for banishing things from your hand. Normally, you don't really have a problem with that with Left Arm Offering. It can unbrick. You might want to consider running 1 or 2 of these if you're finding that the ratios are off, but I just didn't really find a use for them. And then the rest are just pretty good text that I didn't have room for. I wasn't sure what to get rid of. Maybe the normal monster, but we've got Night Dragolich. Change all non-worm attack position monsters that were special summoned from the main or extra deck to defense position, and all non-worm monsters that were special summoned from the main or extra deck lose defense equal to their original defense. And if you didn't know, all of these are worm-type monsters except for Necroface and Eater of Millions, but this isn't special summoned from the deck. So this won't affect your monsters. If you're playing against a deck that's like an Ixie-heavy deck or a Fusion-heavy deck, this can be a really good tech. It's useless against Lynx, though, does nothing since they can't go into defense position, which is why I'm not playing it in the main deck, but it is a pretty decent side deck card. Likewise, Waterfall of Dragon Souls, activate one of these effects, either add a worm monster from your deck to your hand, or send worm monsters from your hand or face up from your field to the graveyard, draw cards equal to the number you sent, +1. Again, this can be kind of good if you're going for Executor, because it can help you get worm monsters into the graveyard. It's also good just for searching out something. Say if you banish Tyrant Dragon, you can activate this during the draw phase, add whatever one you want, and then summon it. It's a really decent card, but because I'm not running Executor, and because I already had a pretty solid deck here, I didn't really want to include that. But you just as easily could if you wanted to. And then Battle Fader, because oftentimes you do brick with this deck, you end up with stuff where you can't summon it, and this can be good for saving you that 1 turn you need going into the standby phase. Plus, when it leaves the field, it's banished, so there's a little bit of synergy with Necroface and Eater of Millions and stuff like that. But anyway, there's the deck. Just sort of like a simple deck to show how the Metaphys work, get you sort of a working framework of it, Go ahead and add whatever you want, change it. If there's anything you would recommend for it, go ahead and leave it down in the comments. And of course, if you'd like to see this in action, I play 10 duels with it against random opponents. There's a link in the description to a separate video where I'll be doing that. It's usually like an hour long or something like that. It's a fun time, though. Anyway, next week I'm going to be looking at a pendulum deck. Should be fun. Until then, good luck and have fun.